Samsung Health is currently the best approximation to a gamification of health. Let me explain. So when it comes to gamifying life in general, I mean, health is one part of life, psychological and also physical health. The thing is, gamification is basically applying the psychological principle that have been distilled that make us work and tick kind of in order for us to optimize the goals we want to achieve, optimize goal achievement. When it comes to health, the goal is obviously to be as healthy as you possibly can while also not spending too much time on health itself. Basically the constraints you have. So what I did for myself, and this is also what you could do, you could just have one system, try to have one system, and Samsung Health is basically the best fitness app that actually lets you accumulate data out of different sources. For example, you can actually track your nutritional intake with Myfitnesspal, basically the biggest database when it comes to nutritional tracking. So this means with Myfitnesspal, you basically just open the app, and then if you get something at the supermarket that has a barcode on it, then usually within basically many countries, you can just scan it, and then you have the item, and it already has nutritional values because some people before put in the nutritional values, even down to the vitamins, sometimes not. The thing is, now you can actually synchronize Myfitnesspal with Samsung Health. This is the first connection. The second connection is that the phones these days, I mean, there is Apple and there is the Android world. And in the Android world, I would say, at least I decided for myself that I would go with Samsung. Now here's the nice thing. Samsung also offers basically the best Android watch on the market, at least of recording this. The best Android watch on the market currently is the Galaxy Watch 4. Why? Because it's the most advanced Android watch. And it also has Android Wear and the old Tizen Samsung had previously on their wearables. This means it's basically the best combination out of the two ecosystems. So now we already have nutrition. The thing is, health in general is really complicated. There are so many things. Like if you eat like a little bit of curry, maybe your risk of Alzheimer decreases by like 0.5%. But if you do this over the next 20 years, you also might have like 0.6%. And then what happens if you take curry, but at the same time you also smoke? What happens then? Therefore, you have to basically not bring all these things together and compare them. Obviously, it makes sense when it comes to effort, for example. What requires more effort? Me quitting smoking or me just adding a little bit of curry? Obviously, the little bit of curry is probably not the biggest effort in the world, and it's probably not that hard to do. When it comes to how you want to invest your time, obviously it makes sense to compare these different things you can actually do to better your health, to optimize your health. Nevertheless, it also makes sense to treat all these things kind of separately. And then, because you just don't understand this bigger thing that is your health. Obviously, because of evolution and also the evolution of beauty and also sexual evolution. So basically there is a kind of sub-branch of evolution. Sometimes it's also explained with the natural evolution coined by Charles Darwin. But there are also people, I'm currently reading a book that's about beauty, and therefore that's just in my brain, and therefore I just said it right now. The thing is, what I wanted to state is how you look is actually kind of also an indicator of how healthy you are. That's not always. That doesn't mean that the best looking people are not smokers or something like this, or will be living forever. Obviously not, but the better you look, the better probably, at least to some extent, also your health. So now, and this also doesn't apply universally, but if you compare yourself like being at 250 kilograms overweight compared to a kind of normal BMI, then obviously the better version is the one that's more closer to the normal BMI. The body mass index, for those of you who don't know. Now, back to Samsung Health and back to basically optimizing your health. We already discussed Myfitnesspal as the first component. This is your nutrition. Your nutrition is one component. Of course, nutrition is basically also other things like eating, your eating behavior, and also time. When it comes to eating, I generally would say there are like two criteria. The first one is when you eat, and the second one is what you eat. You could also say it's free, because you could say when you eat, so the time, what you eat, so the quality, and how much you eat, so the quantity. Obviously, this all plays together, and if you don't, you can eat all the time, but if you at the same time hit your calorie targets that actually make you consistent or that don't let you gain weight or lose weight, then it's all fine. The problem is just that that's just one perspective. And the one perspective obviously doesn't account for energy levels, mental clarity, and all these different things. And also like how social you actually are if you eat all the time, or how much work you can do if you eat all the time. So these are different things. Just an example of the different constraints we have to deal with when trying to optimize health. So now, back to the system I actually wanted to present to you. The system is, for one, the quality and the quantity of the nutrition with Myfitnesspal. Then we have the nutritional timing. And here, what I found and what I also extensively kind of tried within the last 2 or 3 years. I also tried before, but I tried it not as effortful, you could say. So what I tried is to time my eating behavior. And herein comes an app that actually does this for you. So it's basically an eating timer. There is already data out there about intermittent fasting, and there are many promising benefits. They all haven't been basically scientifically researched very well, but nevertheless it looks like there are huge benefits in intermittent fasting. There is already some research on it that is pretty promising. For example, by restricting calories on any animal apart from humans, because this hasn't been tested extensively, also a kind of ethical issue, by reducing calories by 30%, animals or living things tend to live longer by 30%. That's insane, if I remember the numbers correctly, and I think I do. So now, tracking the time you eat with the app called Zero. So the app is called Zero Fasting, and here you can actually set a fasting timer and also the time you eat. So this is basically the timing. It makes sense to restrict. So the most common thing, the most common sense thing currently is, and also the thing that is not very extreme, therefore more people tend to actually be able to do this, is to restrict your feeding window to 8 hours. This means 16 hours a day you are fasting, and then within 8 hours you eat. You could restrict it even further. What I think makes the most sense is if you do 16-8, then it makes sense to do 2 meals, so one in the beginning of the eating window and one at the end. There seems to be a problem with having an eating window of 18-6 or 20-4. Here's why I think. This is just a personal theory, also telling from my experience. If you have 18-6, for example, it's also 6 hours, but within 6 hours, if you eat at the beginning of the 6 hours, and then at the end, it's not like one meal. It's because you are not as hungry in the end of the 6 hours. This means it kind of is already more confusing. It's not as strict as, it's not as defined as just one meal in the beginning and one meal at the end of the 8 hours when it comes to 16-8. Therefore, 18-6 is already a little bit more restricting. 20-4, again, is, when it comes to having a simple perception of the eating window, even more complicated, probably. It's also a personal theory. Why? Because in 4 hours, you basically have you could do a meal for 1 hour or 2 hours. The problem is just, this is also hugely drawing from my personal experience, depending also on your diet. So the two general approaches are kind of high carb diet and then high carb, low fat, mediate protein, and also high fat, mediate protein, and low carb, which is basically called keto if it's more extreme. The problem is, if you are on carbs, this basically keeps you in a hunger cycle, also releasing ghrelin every time at a single point of the day, also from your previous fasts, not fasts, but from the previous points where you actually ate, because your body actually adapts to this, and therefore the body kind of makes you hungry by releasing the hunger hormone ghrelin at this point in time. This is why you usually get hungry at the same point of the day, depending of course on your activity levels, but well, that's kind of a given. Now, back to intermittent fasting and back to 24. Actually, the thing I think is, if you have 24, then you think of it as one big meal, and then you eat in the beginning a little bit, and then in the middle, and then maybe at the end, or maybe just 2 meals. But it basically is like one meal, but it's not because it's 4 hours, and you could do one meal in like 2 hours, but then the problem is that, well, these are 2 meals, and you don't really get hungry in between, therefore it's kind of weird. If you do one meal, and the one meal lasts from 1 hour to 2 hours, then it's not 24, because then the feeding window is not 4 hours, because it's just one meal, and this is the reason you could do 23, so you could do 21 to 3. That's actually something not very many people actually do, I think. Don't really know, but I tried 21 to 3, not really. I mean, sometimes I did, but 22 to 2. Now again, in terms of using an even heuristic, so just using even numbers, this kind of makes more sense. Why? As for myself, I realized that a meal usually should be 1 to 2 hours. So 2 hours at max. If it's more than 2 hours, then it's already counted as a second meal. This is kind of a framework I made up for myself. Why? Because if you actually do one meal a day, which is just eating one meal a day, then you have to find a certain period of time in which the one meal actually counts. And the certain period of time in which the one meal actually counts is either 1 or 2 hours. I tried 1 hour in the beginning, so I did like 2 months with 23 to 1 meal a day. The problem is this. There are also the negative effects of a high carb diet with 1 meal a day, which for me meant that my mental energy was really unstable. And at the same time, I got hungry on the different times of the day, because the thing is, if you are on keto or on low carb, these things just keep you more satiated, and also they get you more trained in burning fat. They basically increase the efficiency also of fat burning, also as a result then of carbs, of using carbs. But that's just an end result after doing this for a few months. Basically the thing is, if you eat carbs, then there is like a temporary storage of carbs in the liver and also in the muscles. The thing is now, if you don't eat carbs, then this temporary storage does never get full. Therefore, if you eat fat, you will first burn a little bit of carbs and protein, not so much the protein, because usually the protein is kind of reserved for building things in our body. Now the idea is this: if you take in fat, then basically the body burns already fat whenever this fat gets into the bloodstream, and then when your body actually switches to long-term storage energy, which also happens to be fat and not carbs, because fat is double as dense, more than double as dense as carbs and protein are when it comes to energy density. The thing is that you just can switch more easily to fat burning because you are already fat burning. The only thing that switches is the source of the fat from the bloodstream, either, so basically from your gut and your digestive tract into the bloodstream, but then it's in the blood, or your fat cells then release the fat if glucagon is actually activated. And glucagon is usually activated when the liver glycogen is at a certain low level. Of course, it's then much more is released when it's like dropped to zero, when the liver glycogen has dropped to zero, but that's just another point. So, I explained a little bit about the nutritional things about Myfitnesspal, tracking the quantity and the quality of your food, and then controlling the time window in which you eat with zero. These are the first two components. We have to note here that zero fasting also has some functionalities, some fitness functionalities kind of. So you can actually track your weight with zero fasting, and there are also other things, because it actually is very interesting. The resting heart rate, for example, in comparison to how many hours you fast, there could be a correlation there. And for this reason, within zero fasting, if you subscribe, you have even more data and statistics. You can actually put in the health data. But there has to be a workaround, because zero fasting doesn't work directly with Samsung Health. The workaround I found, and this will also come again handy when we connect Samsung Health to other apps, is called Health Sync. It's an app that basically allows you to sync different health apps to one and another. It connects Google Fit, so it basically can connect these different things, sometimes only from one direction, source direction, to the other one, and sometimes the other way around, and sometimes in both directions. So you can basically put in the following apps in there: Strava, Samsung Health, Google Fit, Garmin Connect, which is basically the Connect apps of the current market leader in fitness watches. Not really smart watches, but much more sport dedicated watches. And that's Garmin with Garmin Connect. And there is also Fitbit, and that's pretty much it, I guess. There could also be others, like Xiaomi Health, or Mi Health is also a thing. Obviously much more in China than here. So now, Health Sync actually connects all these different things, and for example, for myself, actually connects Samsung Health to Strava, even though there is a native connection now from Strava to Samsung Health that also synchronizes the workouts. Maybe I should switch to this. The reason I didn't was because Health Sync actually, it's kind of a random thing, actually makes the title of the workout big. And I like big letters better, capital letters better. But now there's also a native integration, and it also worked in the past. I just thought with Health Sync it might work a little bit better. So now if you actually want to connect Samsung Health and, for example, have your weight data in zero fasting also to see the correlations, then what you actually can do is to, first of all, so basically Samsung Health acts as your source, as your data source. Then you basically copy the data with health data, with Health Sync, the app called Health Sync. You copy the data to Google Fit. And Google Fit just acts as a copy. So you can actually watch all the data that is synced also in Google Fit, but Google Fit is not the source. It isn't the first place your data actually goes to whenever you sync your smartwatch or fitness watch, for example. This means Samsung Health is the data source, is the place where everything comes together. Then you copy your data to Google Fit, and when it's in Google Fit, what you actually can do is you can connect Google Fit to zero fasting, and then you have your weight data, maybe your body fat, and your resting heart rate, and also maybe your workouts in zero fasting, and you can actually view them there. What also works, at least in theory, is to connect either Google Fit or Samsung Health within this system. It would make sense to connect Samsung Health again to Myfitnesspal. Again, this is a native integration, but here is the thing I at least don't do. I use zero fasting, basically, not really. Zero fasting is basically an additional data point because you cannot sync back the data to Samsung Health. There is no fasting tracker within Samsung Health, therefore this doesn't really make sense. I mean, it's sad. It would be even nicer if you could also track your fast within Samsung Health if you had one app to rule all of your health, but that's not the case. When it comes to Myfitnesspal, what I wouldn't recommend is synchronizing the data, so basically your activity data or your steps, to Myfitnesspal. In my experience, it just screws it up all the time, then it doesn't sync, and then if you, for example, connect Google Fit and Samsung Health, then you have double the data in there, obviously. So what I would recommend is just set a fixed value that actually makes sense for basically the rest of your life in terms of calories. For me, I just set a certain fixed value, and then you can actually see within Samsung Health, I mean, in the past, the feature was even better. So there was like a feature where you actually saw that this amount of calories was the intake, and this amount of calories are the calories you burned. And this data, obviously, the amount of calories burned would be from Samsung Health and from tracking sport and tracking your steps, and the amount of calories of intake would be directly taken from Myfitnesspal. But as I said, the synchronization doesn't really work, therefore it doesn't really make sense to also use Myfitnesspal in order to kind of counterbalance these two things and also make adjustments. So for me, the simpler approach turned out to be just set a fixed value in Myfitnesspal for the rest of the days in Myfitnesspal, and then just have your calories in there. Also, it doesn't usually make sense to vary your intake of calories a lot, because, I mean, when it comes to the scientific data about these things, if you, for example, do intermittent fasting, it would make sense to every now and then break the intermittent fast. Otherwise, at least that's what some people like Thomas DeLauer say, that you actually should switch every now and then, for example, from one meal a day to multiple meals a day, or just switching the time you eat. Nevertheless, when it comes to habits and when it comes to sticking to clean food, the problem is that we have a society where many people earn money with selling you junk food, basically, and that's not something to optimize for. Therefore, junk food is very available, and also there are many psychological triggers, and also it's just easier accessible. It's not really easy accessible, but it's just compared to clean food, not as. Clean food is not as fun, because for the last few centuries, humans basically discovered, or for the last 1,000 years, that if you add specific things like fat and sugar to food, the food becomes more addicting, and therefore the satiation system is kind of disrupted, and therefore this doesn't really work this well. Back to Myfitnesspal and Samsung Health. Myfitnesspal and Samsung Health, there's a problem with the data sync. It basically only syncs the calories. In my experience, it doesn't really sync the foods you ate, even though you could put in the foods in Samsung Health, but the data library is just not as big. So therefore, what I still am using, and this works also if you are on Garmin Connect as your main health data platform, because Myfitnesspal also connects to Garmin Connect. Now, we already discussed these two apps. Let's now actually go into even more apps. In order to gamify all of the sport experience, at least the part where you actively do something. So for example, I don't think it does make sense to optimize for a maximum amount of steps. Why doesn't this make sense? Because the optimal value of steps is not like 10,000 or 20,000 or 100,000. Of course, for many people, because many people at these days tend to be too obese to be at an ideal weight, and then just increasing the steps is obviously something that's good. The problem is just, if you want to optimize for maximizing your steps, where do you stop? Do you stop at basically running 24 hours a day? Obviously not. Therefore, the settle point is somewhere in between. And steps is just used very often because this is a thing everybody, at least with 2 legs and maybe also 2 arms, in order to balance all these things, can do. And therefore, it's a very easy step that applies to everybody. This is why it's used so often. It doesn't really make sense to run like 25,000 steps every single day. Of course, it is nice, but if you wanted to optimize for it and you actually have a job where you actually sit in front of a desk 8 hours a day, then it doesn't really make sense to try to optimize for steps. This is what I'm saying. I could do more examples, but I don't now. Therefore, what you actually want to optimize for, and this is also what Google Fit and also Samsung Health already realized, you actually want to optimize for basically combined fitness score. This could be that instead of walking 50,000 steps, you just run for 20 minutes. And in terms of optimizing your health, this would be a step that would, for every unit of time at least, bring more benefits. This is the reason Google Fit and also Samsung Fit or Samsung Health basically have fitness scores, and you can close the rings and basically a unit of a certain amount of time with rigorous exercise and a certain amount of time where you just walk or don't exercise very heavily or don't breathe very heavily are just viewed not as valuable as these higher intense workouts. It's already basically optimizing also for health and also optimizing for fitness, and realizing a bummer now connected to this issue with steps being applicable to everybody is Samsung Health's challenges. Within Samsung Health, the only thing you can do is to challenge somebody either to a maximum amount of steps or per unit of time. For example, it could be like 3 days, and whoever has the most steps within 3 days wins the challenge, which is very nice. But yeah, well, again, who is healthier, or who basically does more for his body? Somebody who does who swims 3 hours a day, or somebody who is just walks a few steps. Therefore, it just doesn't really make sense to optimize for steps. That's again what I'm saying. Nevertheless, within Samsung Health, these are the only challenges you can do. Again, very limited. Nevertheless, Samsung is still the best all-in-one data platform I could find, at least for myself. Now, because it's so limited also when it comes to challenges, and also using social accountability as a tool to improve your performance and the intensity of your workouts, what comes in handy is another service called Strava. I think I already mentioned Strava when explaining Health Sync, the app that connects all these different platforms. And I also mentioned it before. So what Strava actually is, it's basically something like Facebook, it's basically a social media where you can post your sporty activities. Why is this so useful? For one, it also allows you to analyze the data just more. For example, because Strava has so much data, at least compared to Samsung Health, and also has more experience when it comes to actually figuring out how many kilometers or at which pace, obviously connected to the kilometers, a certain route, for example, has, a certain street, for example, has, which profiles, for example, a street has, and where the height increase of 1 meter actually happens. This means Strava has kind of more data, and also uses the data it gets, for example, from Samsung Health, and improves actually upon the data. This could mean, at least within the old Galaxy watches, so the Galaxy Active 2, which I had, what happened is that compared to Garmin watches, a GPS point when running was made every 5 meters. This means if you run an S, and the beginning of the S and the end of the S are the 2 5-meter points, then in between, the distance is not counted. If you compare these to Garmin Connect, or the Garmin watches, they made points, GPS points basically every 1 meter. So this means 0.1, then 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. So basically more distance. And this creates an inaccuracy and also a discrepancy between Samsung Health and also Strava when it comes to pace and when it comes to distance, which is not very nice, I guess. I don't know if they improved this on the Galaxy Watch 4. I don't know. So, using Strava now, what this enables you to do is you can actually run with friends, even though you are not with the friends, but you can compare your runs to your friends. Imagine, for example, you are within a group where everybody does triathlon. This would mean that everybody talks all the time. Not everybody talks, but sometimes the thing about triathlon comes up, and then they talk about nutrition and how this actually correlates to the triathlon performance and things like these. The thing is, just by pure exposure, you actually think about these things, and actually over time you also implement these things. There is a common saying, it's not really scientifically proven, but you are basically the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So how can you spend more time with sporty people? By actually it's not really spending time one-on-one, obviously, but nevertheless it kind of works. Where on Instagram and Facebook, you compare yourself, or the image of yourself you have whenever you photograph or take a video of yourself, you compare yourself when it comes to attractivity, yourself to others, and how interesting your life, for example, is, and how many friends you have to others. The same effect happens if you compare your sport activities, your run, to others. And if you compare yourself to people who are better than you, this means you kind of use this inherent drive we all have to be better than others. Of course, in a very nice world, everybody would not compare yourself or oneself to others. But that's just kind of how people work. This is just a principle that has been used over a very long time, and you can also use it if you want to actually increase your performance. An example, if I randomly go for a run, or if you randomly go for a run, and you basically don't even track the run, then you just run. And if you don't even have the time, then you just cannot compare all these different things. If, for example, now you compare a run from winter where it's like 10 degrees Celsius and from summer where you ran at 30 degrees Celsius with the heat of the sun over you, and you actually try to compare these two, what happens, for example, that with every degree it gets hotter when it comes to Celsius, your performance actually decreases. Also, there have been studies where just the cooling of the limbs, so the hands and the feet, because they are basically the points where the blood basically goes back into our body. So it comes basically from the heart and then the veins, and then that's the point where it goes back. This is the reason why cooling your limbs actually helps, kind of, in order to increase performance, and these performance increases, at least in these studies, were like huge. So if you compare these two scenarios, you actually cannot really compare, even if you ran the exact same route. And now let's also count in nutrition. What did you eat the day before? What was actually your body fat percentage? What was your weight? Did you actually do like an extensive leg workout before? Did you hike 2 weeks before, and therefore you are in a better position when it comes to endurance and things like this? This means it's just not really comparable. But the goal now is to make it as comparable as possible in order to kind of activate this drive of just trying to be better. Now, if you track your things with a running watch, your runnings or your cycle tours or your bike tours, what happens is that you just think about these things. You just think about, oh yeah, what will this person think? And you also just have a reference value of what other people, for example, in the same age group, aka your friends, are performing and what times they actually have. And what this does for you is it just gives you a reference. And this means if this person can do it, I can do it also, because why shouldn't I be able to do? You can actually see the psychological effect whenever somebody hits a world record in something. Example, there was a certain amount of miles and a certain amount of time it took for a cyclist to do these miles. And after the first person basically broke this record, in the years after, many other people broke this record. And before, nobody did. So it seems at least to be, it could also be just a correlation, obviously, and not a causation, but it seems to be that just breaking the mental barrier and seeing that it is possible. And it's also what many people these days use. If I can do it, you can do it. I mean, that's basically this principle, very simplified. Of course, this doesn't really apply because everybody is different. And I now really mean it, and not as a joke, but everybody is really different. Everybody has a certain level of things that are stored in his brain, of environment, of I don't want to talk about how different people are. Fact of the matter is, it's not that I don't want to talk about it, but I'm already 33 minutes in, and I'm talking about a system to track actually your health and to optimize your health. Therefore, this is Strava. Just use it in order to gamify the whole experience and also to connect to other people when it comes to sharing your fitness data. It sounds really like I'm working for a tech startup and I actually want to tell you about this thing. Oh, it's so nice, share, but it's the gamification element that actually hooks you and also me, and it's the element that you actually compare yourself to others and you hold yourself accountable. If you do a run where you actually just stop randomly and you don't run anymore, then you cannot post it, and that's it. You just cannot post it. I mean, there's a reason why so many people just post random pictures of themselves, or because we actually want to have the confirmation of others. This is like an inherent thing. The more others basically confirm our thoughts, our actions, the better we feel. I don't want to explain this any further. So, this is Strava. Then we have Myfitnesspal. Then we have basically the connection, which is Health Sync. And we also have Zero, for fasting. Now there are a few other apps. In line with optimizing your health even further, what I did, for example, is to check my blood sugar every now and then. This is something I did not extensively, but I did it a few times. Therefore, I got basically a blood sugar measurement tool, which connects over Bluetooth to another app. Therefore, it's kind of a diabetes app, because obviously people with diabetes need to check their blood sugar every now and then, at least, in order for them to release the proper amount of insulin, which is the hormone that basically brings the nutrients from the blood into the cells. Simplified. So now, what did I want to say? Insulin, back to the cells, back to the blood sugar. So therefore, I, for example, did a few extended fasts over the period of the last 2 years. I did before, but it didn't work out so well because I didn't properly manage my fluid intake and also the electrolytes. This basically led to the Keto Flu, which is the state that can happen if you go on fasting or on keto and you are not used to be on keto or fasting, because your body actually isn't used to the state, because from 1 year or from 0 years till now you actually ate 3 times a day. Therefore, the need for actually being in the state would not be there, and therefore it's just not as well trained. With trained being to regulate your body's ability to regulate the nutrients and also the electrolytes and also the salt intake and also potassium and all of these things. Now, back to the app we just discussed. It's basically an app where just your blood sugar measurements appear. You cannot connect it to any other app. The app I had for myself, so the company was Contour, and the app is actually called Contour Diabetes app or something like this, and there you have some blood sugar measurements. How does measuring your blood sugar look? You basically take your finger, and then, as you saw probably in movies or on the internet already, you just open your skin basically, and then a little bit of blood comes out, and then you can just measure the blood sugar in the blood. That's it. Now, blood sugar measurement. Actually, we'll get my phone real quick, because I do have all the apps I use in a folder, and in this folder, so my other phone seems to be out of battery. That's not very unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. It's not very fortunate, and that's the thing I wanted to say. So there are a few other apps which also kind of connect to this system, even though they don't connect really well. When it comes to now, how do we actually put in all the fitness data? You actually need either your phone, or if you actually want to track workouts like properly and not only the steps, what you need to do is to track your fitness, not your fitness, but your fitnessy activities with a proper watch. Why a watch? Because a watch, compared to the phone, actually can take your heart rate, because it's on you all the time. The Galaxy phones, many of them also can track your heart rate, but only if you put a finger on the back next to the cameras. So it actually has a blood pressure management, not management, but measurement tool, a sensor, and also a not fitness, but heart rate sensor, usually in the back of the phone, at least when it comes to the Galaxy phones. So what can you actually track with a watch? First of all, the data points you can track are your heart rate, your blood pressure, your oxygen saturation, at least with this watch specifically. Also with other fitness watches, sometimes less functionality, obviously. So, heart rate, the blood pressure, what was the third thing I wanted to say? The oxygen saturation, the length of a workout, sometimes also the movements of a workout. Specifically, when it comes to, for example, training, circuit training or training in the gym, what happens is that you do certain movements over time. Ideally, it would also track like, oh yeah, you did 25 sit-ups. It's just that these trackings don't work very well. Therefore, it makes more sense to just track the time and the workout itself, and then also the heart rate. So the movement itself in these workouts is not tracked. But when it comes to swimming, the movement again is tracked. So if you swim a certain amount of meters, usually 25 meters, one length of a swimming pool, then you also come back. And what happens is that with GPS and also with the amount of strokes you did, you can actually measure how many things you did. I don't know the word for it. And also, so how many times you basically hit all of the two borders of the swimming pool. Therefore, you can actually calculate the distance. The same is true for running. For one, because of the gyro sensors, so basically the sensors that actually track the movement of the watch in space and time, not really time, but much more space. Over time, when running, you actually can track the movement of the run. And not only the movement of the run, but also because GPS connects to the watch, because these watches have GPS and also often internet with LTE. Basically, they are mobile phones. This means they also can connect to the internet, and you can also do calls via LTE, which basically makes them even more a phone, a very small phone on your wrist. They can track the actual movement in space. Geographically spoken, we now then have the kilometers, but what you also can do, you can actually calculate the pace, because at a certain amount of time, a certain amount of time per unit of distance actually gives you unit of distance per amount of time, which is the speed. And then you have the speed. And because of the gyro sensors, for example, if you run, within Samsung Health, what actually happens is, because of the movement and how stiff, for example, your arms are and things like these, what actually happens is that there is basically an algorithm that figures out how you actually ran and when you actually put your feet to the ground. So therefore you can actually analyze your data when it comes to running and your actual running movement, and the app actually just says how you actually can improve, how you should improve, whether, for example, your stiffness or your stride length or your stride cadency is actually good or needs improvement, and you then actually just shows you what you can do. For example, you can do random movements and just train these movements and then get better at running in order to not hurt your joints and all of these other things like ligaments in the near term time, but also in the future. I just had to sneeze, therefore the shortcut. You probably didn't even realize. Now, you basically can track all of these things on your watch. And then the nice thing is, because it's made by Samsung, it just synchronizes very well with Samsung Health. But because the Galaxy Watch 4 is now also an Android Wear watch, basically also having Android on there, you can also do the data source input with Google Fit, which you also could do. I didn't switch because Samsung Health still offers a few more things, and also I stuck to Samsung Health at this point in time. But Google just is on the approach of just having everything more streamlined and more simplified, and therefore being applicable to more people, for the general average person, and not so much for the Joe that actually does hiking and running and things like these. Therefore, I am tracking all of these data things still with Samsung Health. Why didn't I go with Garmin, and why also maybe you shouldn't go with Garmin? The problem is that these watches are just better at also being smartwatches. The ideal smartwatch is basically a fitness watch and a smartwatch, being a phone. When it comes to Garmin, for example, obviously the integration with Galaxy phones or also with Android is not really there. Or it just is more likely that the integrations are better in a watch that actually sports Android Wear, Android, or Tizen OS. Therefore, I stuck with this watch even though the battery life is pretty damn not great. So now we have the watch where you actually can track these things. With the Samsung Galaxy Watch 4, what you also can do is you can track your body composition. And when it comes to body composition, we already go into another territory. And I'm just realizing this is one of these videos where I talk for 44 minutes at this point in time. Now, when it comes to body composition, so this actually, first of all, just explaining very simplified what it actually is. It's the things you consist out of, and you consist mainly out of bones, out of other tissue, like organs, like things that aren't really skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles is the third big point, and then we also have fat. So we have 4 different components, roughly speaking. And you can actually measure these 4 different components by actually letting a current flow through your body. And if you let a current flow through your body and you actually connect the left hand and the right hand, it takes the route of the least effort and basically connects the shortest route, and therefore it comes out of your other hand. Weird, but that's how it works. It's called bioimpedance. And this is how you can measure body composition, for example. And this is also the reason why you shouldn't cover the 2 buttons on the Galaxy Watch 4 with a cover, for example. Why? Because if you want to measure body composition, you actually need to connect these 2 hands with these 2 fingers, and then the current flows through your arms and back to this one here again. Now, depending on how fast the current flows and depending on the delay and things like these, because the different materials have basically different properties, fat has a different property than water and things like these, this means you can actually kind of approximate the body composition with something like the watch. This is basically the big new feature of the Galaxy Watch 4. So now, body composition is a relative value. Basically, for example, body fat is a relative value. Body fat is a percentage. It's a percentage of all of your weight. Your weight is basically the thing you weigh. So basically the mass multiplied by the planet you stand on, by the gravity, or rather by the... What's the proper name in English? Acceleration. It's acceleration your planet actually has. So therefore, usually it's around 10. This is the reason why kilograms and also newtons are kind of connected with the factor 10. So now, when it comes to measuring your body composition, you actually need this reference value of the body weight. Otherwise, it's completely useless. Why? Because it's a relative value, and it's only applicable, it only makes sense if it is a reference, basically a part of something else. The part of something else, or the else, is the body weight. Therefore, you actually need a scale, and this is where another app enters the Samsung Health Data system. It's called... So there are different apps out there, and it doesn't really matter which app you take. Sometimes it's the same app, just the manufacturer is just different, and it's actually the same structure of the app. For me, I went with a scale that actually measures my weight, but also my body fat. And actually, not really only my body fat, but much more things. It also measures, or at least approximates, how much skeletal muscle you have, how much, what your bone density is, for example. These are obviously just approximations, because it cannot measure these things directly. Nevertheless, I bought this scale from Amazon. It was like $30, with bucks being dollars or euros. I think it was like 30 euros, something around this. And it connects via Bluetooth to your phone. So then you have the app on your phone, and this app on your phone actually now again, so mine is called FeelFit, and this again connects to Samsung Health or to Fitbit or to Google Fit, maybe also other apps, but I use just Samsung. Therefore I connected to Samsung. What this now means is it does not only transfer the sheer weight to Samsung, but what it also does is it also transfers the body composition data, at least to a certain point. This means it usually transfers the body fat and also the weight. Maybe more data, I didn't really look into this recently. So this was basically the update when the Galaxy Watch 3 had the body composition already. I don't know, it didn't have, but the Galaxy Watch 4 now has, and therefore now within Samsung Health you also have the body fat percentage, which is nice because this means even more of these outer data sources are integrated within the core Samsung Health. So now, what is the process? If you weigh yourself on a scale from 1 to 10 maybe, and then you transfer the data via Bluetooth to the FeelFit app, and then automatically it appears out of nowhere within Samsung Health. This means the only thing you have to do is you need to step on the scale and have your phone within Bluetooth reach, and then the weight is transferred to the app, and the app transfers it automatically to Samsung Health. Completely automated. That's nice. So now you have your weight. You need to weigh yourself with a scale because Why? I mean, you cannot really do something else. I just wanted to make the joke that you can also pull yourself into the air and then measure how heavy you are, but this is something that doesn't really work, as you might already have found out. So now, we have the weight, and we have the body composition, and now this watch also can measure your body composition. The problem is just, it's a relational value. Therefore, if you have the body composition data, and you measure it, what you also need is an additional scale. If you already have to buy an additional scale, you can just invest in a scale that actually also measures your body composition, and therefore, I mean, the price is pretty much the same these days, I guess. I mean, maybe you can get a scale for $10, but investing $30 into a scale with body impedance or bioimpedance is actually quite a good investment, I guess. And also, most other scales will also be around this price point. So therefore, the body composition feature, at least in my case, is something I don't really use. Why? Because if I already measure myself, so my weight on the scale, I can also quite as well take the body composition data out of the scale, because it's probably more accurate, because it has more surface, and also it's just not a very tiny watch. Another important thing is, if you track these data things over time, what is very important with data in general is that the methods stay the same. So this means if I, for example, switched from measuring the body composition on my watch from one day and then, or the next week, let's just say within a week, one time a week or once a week, and then I would switch again to the scale and then to the watch and then to the scale and to the watch, there just is a difference, because the methods of measurement are just different, and therefore you don't really know if the data is different. In general, bioimpedance isn't really accurate, but what is nice about these things is, as long as you use the same method for measuring all of these things, when it comes to body composition or weight, if you use the same scale again and again and again, you will have data that is at least consistent within your measurement method. This could mean that your scale could be maybe 5 kilograms off, but it doesn't really matter, because the only thing that matters for you is whether you weigh more on this scale than the week before or less on this scale than the week before. And obviously the assumption is that one device doesn't vary as much in terms of measurements as different devices, and that's probably also an assumption that is true for many different scenarios. So now the body composition on the watch doesn't really make sense, therefore tracking the body weight and the body composition with the FeelFit app, at least for myself, and the app and the scale was called Renfo, I guess, but these are kind of generic brands out of China. They are just offered on Amazon, so I got my scale from Amazon. Maybe I put it in the description, or what I also could do is, because these are so many apps, maybe on the channel, basically, there is a site called Kit, and what Kit allows me to do is I can just link random stuff, and I don't have to put it each and every time into the YouTube video description. And I also can put in pictures, therefore, and also short descriptions. Therefore, I will probably make a kit with all the different apps for one. So basically the fitness system I use currently, and this will be one kit. So this just links you to all the different apps. And then additionally, probably I would just link all the different things I use, like the Galaxy Watch, maybe my phone, maybe the scale, maybe also the FeelFit app, for example. Also maybe Strava and things like these. And you will find the link if you click on the link tree below the video. And there's the link tree, and then you just scroll to Kit, which is the website that actually lets me link all these different sets. And then I don't have to put in like 20 links in the description, but this is just then on Kit. So this is just a kind of mental note for myself, but also for you if you actually want to dive deeper into these things. I probably have already listed somewhere all the apps I use when it comes to the fitness system. I just don't know as of now, but you will find it on this channel, in the link tree of this channel, which can be found below in the video, or also in the YouTube or Facebook description, wherever you watch this video. Now, are there also additional things? There are additional things I use, basically health apps. I don't use, as of now, a meditation app, because I just haven't found one that's not very expensive. There is Headspace, which you hear every now and then, I guess, if you listen to podcasts, for example. Now, the thing is, that's just very expensive, and therefore I just don't use it. There is also, I would try it out if it also wasn't very expensive. It's not very expensive, it's just if you have different subscriptions, and of course you can have all these different health data subscriptions. For example, Strava has a subscription. This service I just mentioned has a subscription, and therefore it just adds up. And if you want to cut costs, does it really matter to you if you have like a few things more? Also, Zero Fasting, for example, has a subscription, and it's like $60 a year, and then this is $60 a year, and yeah, well, just cost effectiveness, I guess. When it comes to the different apps I wanted to mention, Sam Harris, basically, I would say, what is he actually? Good question. Maybe he's a neuroscientist or something like this. Nevertheless, he has a meditation app, and it's called Waking Up by Sam Harris, I think. Probably also very nice, but I don't use it. But if you want to dive into meditation and you actually want to pay for it, Headspace or Waking Up by Sam Harris, I guess, are two things you can actually go into. It would also be nice if you could somehow connect your meditation sessions, and maybe you can actually track meditating on the Galaxy Watch. I haven't tried it because I don't sit down to meditate. What you can do is you can track like 10 minutes of stretching, for example. You can also track 10 minutes of running, 10 minutes of dancing. Basically every activity you can think of probably has a preset there. Often without the movement, because, I mean, just with the movement of the steps and also the heart rate and things like these. So therefore, kind of getting the intensity of the workout, not really by, just by your heart rate, because your heart rate is, and also your breathing and also your oxygen saturation, therefore, but just not the geographical movement. This is just not implied in many of these presets. So now, what else do we have left? Breathing. There are breathing apps out there. So in general, just a very simplified description of all of the areas or all of the breathing topic. When it comes to breathing, you have two different things, your mouth and your nose. The thing is, your nose is basically the dedicated organ for breathing, but many of us breathe through the mouth. The mouth is basically the just in case emergency thing for breathing, but myself included, and also many others, just breathe through the mouth all the time, which is not beneficial and has negative effects when it compared to the nose in many different areas. The structure of your face, for example, could be kind of a result, or could be highly correlated to how you breathe and things like these. Therefore, training breathing kind of makes sense. When it comes to training the breathing, there is this app it's a book written by James Nestor. It's called Breath. This is actually kind of the how to breathe guide I would recommend. And within the app, and also if you follow Wim Hof, for example, for the Wim Hof method, there are certain breathing patterns that actually are quite beneficial in order to amp yourself up, in order to bring yourself down. So basically, if you exhale more than you inhale, you calm down. And if you inhale more than you exhale, you basically ramp yourself up. And if you do something like very short breaths, not very short breaths, but a very fast-paced rhythm of breathing, then you can get kind of high just by breathing. This is basically hyperventilation. And Wim Hof, for example, when doing these things where you then lie down and also can actually hold your breath for 1 to 2 minutes, or maybe even 3 minutes or even more, it's basically hyperventilating and then putting in more oxygen into the bloodstream, and therefore you don't have to breathe as often or as much in the time after. This is why you can hold your breath longer. So there is an app. There are different apps on breathing. The one I use is called Breath. And I didn't extensively use it, I just tried it a few times, but this is kind of the app that was the most minimalist looking, wasn't paid for, so I didn't have to pay for it, and it was just very simple. So what you can do, and this is also what James Nestor, for example, recommends, in general, just breathing out 5 seconds and 5 seconds in. This is like the normal breathing pattern you should follow, and you can train it with the app. You can also use the Wim Hof app, so this is a different app that kind of connects, not really, because there is no point of connection whatsoever apart from the health topic. So there is no app connection, data connection. But you can also use the Wim Hof app. There is also a paid version, but within the normal version, what you can track is actually your cold showers. If you do cold showers or cold exposure in general, you can also track simple things like push-ups and things like these, and handstand, and how long you have been able to do the handstand. Just a few examples in there. It's not like a full-blown fitness tracker or something like this. What you also can track is the amount of time you actually are able to hold your breath if you do these breathing patterns by Wim Hof. And the more you do these things, the better you get. Therefore, you could either track it with Wim Hof or also the app I mentioned. It's called Breathe. There are many different apps called Breathe. This is the reason, again, why I link it in the link tree and then on Kit. So, this app is very simple, and you can also use the Wim Hof app. What else is there to discuss? When in general it comes to tracking things, what I found for myself to be very useful is a habit tracking app. So basically, if you think about tasks in general, I mean, this is I wanted to say this is very off topic, but nevertheless it kind of is not, because I just use it to explain it. If you do things, you usually do something over a certain period of time. The period of time and how often you do these things is called the frequency. So a task manager, for example, a classic task manager like To-Do List or Microsoft To-Do, or also the Outlook task manager you have, or any other task manager app you use, is basically a task that is usually performed once, and then you can just tick it off. There are also tasks that just have to be that are as frequent as 1 week, for example. Grocery haul, maybe once or twice a week. Therefore, these tasks are just have a higher frequency, and the frequency is not one. This means these are tasks that are repetitive. When it comes to repetitive tasks, there's a very special subset of tasks, and these are the tasks that can be or should be repeated or make sense to be repeated on a daily basis. And these are the daily tasks. There are also weekly tasks. There are also tasks you could do every other day, every second day, for example. What I did in the past, for example, I used the 2-day heuristic in order to schedule my runs and also my workouts. So every second day, basically, I did. So if I on day 1 ran, then on day 2 I worked out, on day 3 I ran again. So basically just this pattern. The problem is just that the weekdays change all the time, and therefore it's not as consistent as you would want it to. Therefore I changed it to actually Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So basically this is consistent every single week. Therefore I have a weekly consistency, and I also have a longer rest period over the weekend where I don't work out. But I, on all of these other days, usually go for a run or do something else that's like cardio. It's more like cardio and not so much strength training. Just a mental note for you and also for me. So now, what have we been talking about? We have been talking about the habit tracker. What is a habit now? A habit is basically something you usually can track on a daily basis. So it's the tasks. It's a task with the frequency of a daily thing. And it also usually is something that can be done and then within 1 day, and then the task for this day is done. So it has to be a task that cannot be done like 8 hours a day. I mean, it could be a task that is done 8 hours a day. The thing is just, if you do more of these tasks within a day, it doesn't really make sense. This is kind of the very specific subset. So it's the frequency is daily, but also if you did this one thing on this specific day, it's done. That's called a daily, or it's also a habit. Many of these habit trackers basically aim for this daily habit you can do once a day, but often it doesn't make sense to do things once a day, like doing laundry. Does it make sense to do the laundry 10 minutes every single day? Nope. It makes sense to do it once a week. Does it make sense to buy Christmas presents every single week or every single month? No. It only makes sense once a year, so the frequency is just different. Therefore, I would recommend, if you actually want to track things, when it comes to things, I'm talking about health things. Like, I track, for example, if I went for a run this day. This means over time I have basically a calendar in which every single block, every single day where I went on a run is basically a colored cube or rectangle, much more a cube. No, it's not a cube. It's a square. and the other days are not. What you also can do usually within a habit tracker app, you can set the frequency. You can say this has to be done daily, this has to be done twice a week, this has to be done once a week. So what I would recommend is, additionally to tracking all of these different things, if you actually want to track when you did Wim Hof breathing, when you actually did a cold shower, and all of these other things. And again, this gamifies all of the experience, because then it's like a game where you can check off tasks every single day. And if you did these tasks, the more tasks you have, the more points you have. What I use now as a habit tracker app is a very simple habit tracker app. It's basically, you can set a description, so basically the title of the habit, then you have a description, and if you click on this, then you have like more, where you can actually make notes. Then it's basically a calendar, and with every single check, with every single thing you check, you can actually just check off the day, this habit for this specific day. You can also check it, so for example, 3 times a week. When it comes to tracking the workouts, I track the gym habit 3 times a week, on Monday, Wednesday, Friday usually. And this means this is also fulfilled. So it's basically not the frequency daily, so the habit is already 100%. So basically fulfillment 100%. If I did it 3 times a week and I am basically keeping up with this time, because every single day where you don't do something, obviously the habit itself is not 100% anymore, but it's then less percent if you don't track it. Now, it, I think, makes sense to additionally track a few things, like example cold showers, because there is no part in this system I just discussed where you can actually track the showers. What you also could do is to create a habit for any single thing you actually want to track. This could mean that you want to track your body fat percentage, and if you are below a certain point or above a certain point, you just check if body fat at this day is less than this percentage or is more than this percentage, then you can check it off. And you can also say, like, if I ran 2 times a week, then I can check all of these things within a week, and then the habit is 100%. I will link you the habit tracking app I use. It's free, it's very simple, but nevertheless it has like huge statistics, and also you can actually do widgets, different widgets within the points. For example, you can do a widget for your whole life, basically with all the days, and on every single day where you actually check the habit. For example, having a habit for, if you want to get off of caffeine, then I, for myself, introduced a habit called caffeine free. If the day was free of caffeine and I didn't drink a coffee or something else with caffeine, then I could check it off. And now, I also tracked my childhood where I didn't drink caffeine, and now I have, like, from all the days I already lived, a few thousand days, a certain percentage of days are the days where the habit is checked. And this makes things real, because you cannot grasp things like, oh yeah, in this year I did this amount of workouts. If you don't track these things, you just have no way to know. And this makes these things trackable. Just with Strava, it also makes them comparable. It also gamifies all of the experience. Therefore, it would make sense if you actually want to increase. So if you struggle with a certain part of all of this health system, or in general with other things, you just need to track these things more. And if you track these things more, then you actually need to put your focus and attention on, oh yeah, I didn't do this. And every single day, if you don't do this, it reminds you, oh yeah, I didn't do this. Oh yeah, I didn't do this. And if you then are able to do it the other day, then it's already in your mind. This means you just bring your attention to the things you want to bring your attention to. And if you can also, for example, set reminders to weigh yourself within the FeelFit app, you can also set a reminder for so you could create a habit with the title below a certain kilogram amount. And this means if you are below this amount, your target weight maybe, then you check off the habit, and then you could also set a reminder for the habit. This means you step on a scale, then the body composition and the weight gets transferred to Samsung Health and also to FeelFit. And what happens additionally is that, like 1 minute after, you can actually set the minutes in this app. Then you get a reminder, and you can, like, oh yeah, was it below this certain amount of kilograms? Was it below the target weight or above? And then you can just check it off. And then over time, over your life, for example, you can say, this was probably my ideal weight for, at least for a certain body fat percentage, for example. And then you can just very easily see that I mean, obviously also you need to consider that up until a certain point in time you actually grew. So at a certain height, for the rest of your life, you can actually see on how many days of the year, or not of the year, but of the life, you have been below or above the target weight. And makes things just very visually appealing, but also just lets you grasp these things. And you can then see that, for example, every single day where I don't drink a coffee is a caffeine-free day. And this also reminds me that I don't want to get into caffeine again for myself, for example speaking, because this disrupts then the sleep. And if it disrupts the sleep, then you get into a vicious cycle that just continues, and then you drink more caffeine, and also the caffeine tolerance increases, and then it doesn't work anymore as a cognitive enhancer, kind of, because it's not really. And then eventually you will realize that you have to quit again, and then the cycle begins again. But if you actually track these things, and also if you have like a 30-day chain, this is also the reason why many of these experiments, these monthly experiments, I did 30 days of fasting, I did 30 days of trying the keto diet, I did 30 days of being thirsty, I did 30 days of journaling. This is also why they are kind of so popular, I guess, because mentally, psychologically, if you have a chain of events, there is some inherent drive in us to actually want to keep the chain. If you are not able to keep the chain, for example, when it comes to diet, I don't always stick to keto. I sometimes stick to low carb. I sometimes just mix it up. If I mix it up, nevertheless, every single day after this, and this is kind of a hack around, it's a hack to prevent the negative effects from breaking a chain from happening. Because, I mean, the positive effects from this chain effect are there, but if you then break the chain, it's like, yeah, all or nothing. It's like, oh yeah, if I broke the chain anyway, therefore it doesn't make sense, because it would take like 30 days to keep up a chain of 30 days again, or to have a chain of 30 days again. If you then track every individual day, and every individual day is a day that's tracked, then this adds a number to your daily count over your lifetime. And this is something that's useful because it increases the absolute number, and then therefore it's a gamified number, basically, that with every absolute increase means you are improving your health at a certain percentage point. And this is the ideal thing. So for tracking in general, and also for tracking health data, you actually want to track things that with every single increase of an absolute number, and when it comes to dailies, the number is usually the days, with every increase, it means that you are better. There are also many functions or correlations between different things that are not optimal. The optimal point is basically not at one end of the scale. So it's basically not maximizing or minimizing something, but when it comes to weight, for example, it's not about minimizing the weight up to 10 kilograms or down to 10 kilograms, or maximizing the weight even when it comes to building up muscles up to 500 kilograms. But the optimal point is somewhere in between. This means it is not really trackable with dailies. Why? Because the optimal point is not an extreme. Therefore, if you increase the number of days, I mean, you have to find a workaround for increasing the absolute number, the tracking number, basically the target number. And this workaround is the day. This means you set a specific zone within the zone, if you are within the zone, for example, below, let's say 100 kilograms and above 50 kilograms, just randomly, then you kind of check off the habit. And if you weigh above or below, then you don't check off the habit, and therefore you kind of convert this number, that is a number that has an optimal point in between the extremes, into a number that with every single increase, you also get an increase in the target value, basically. And that kind of sums up all the different things. Oh yeah, I have one other app, which is called Puri. This is kind of gross if you are not into these things. And I would also not say that I'm really into these things, but you can of course track the things that come into your body. You can also track the things that come out of your body. And it also makes sense in theory to analyze all of these different things. So there are basically these stripes you can get, and these actually analyze your urine. So this means, for example, if you go on a fast, then ketone bodies are produced more. And you now could get a ketone meter to actually measure the amount of ketone bodies in your body, and therefore basically measure how deep into ketosis you already are, deep into fat burning. Ketosis is in general a different state than fat burning, even though in ketosis fat burning is very high, but it's not just the same as I said right now. So you can actually measure different things, different values, and actually also track these data points very easily, and that's kind of a very cheap way compared to getting a blood test, for example, which every time you don't do it on, you have to pay for it if there is no medical reason, usually within the health insurance coverage. And this means tracking basically the data in the urine there is also an app for it. How does it work? It's basically stripes with different colors, and then once the urine basically is applied, then why am I even talking about this? At the same time, I mean, that's just, why wouldn't you talk about it, I guess? And then all of these squares have different colors, and you can just, there are apps where you can just take a screenshot, but I found that these stripes were much more expensive, therefore I just bought the cheap ones, and then you manually can add the picture, and you also can say, oh yeah, it's this color, it's this color, it's this color, and then it also saves these things, and also in the cloud, therefore it's just an additional data point. It's also, when it comes to all of these different data points, I mean, right now, as you are watching this, you're probably not 75 years old, I guess. But maybe you're much more closer to my age range, or to my age. And, I mean, if you're 5 years old, maybe you're watching this, but maybe also not. Therefore, the thing is just, here's another thought about this. I mean, maybe right now you don't care about your heart rate from 1 month ago. But if you're 80, and your heart rate doesn't work as well anymore, or your heart, then you just might want to be able to have data that actually is from you, and that actually means something, and you can compare it to. So therefore, by tracking your health data now, you actually create a reference value for the future you that will be, in terms of health, pretty much crappier. So basically, health peaks at usually age 25, and then it just goes down, it declines. We begin to age, basically. And from this point in time, also neuroplasticity in the brain kind of closes down, lots of other points. But if you don't track your peak performance now, you don't have a reference value. If you want to start a marathon, if you're 75 and you actually want to check in with all the different things that then are available, if you don't have the data from you now, and if you don't have it stored and accessible somewhere, then you have at least more problems than somebody who has. Another big thing, data security, is obviously a very big problem when tracking your health data, because there are companies out there who want to see your reaction as to content, for example, as close as possible, and monitor these reactions in order to basically predict your emotional states and to target ads directly to you. Basically, both words would have been able to make this sentence: fulfill and target. Not fulfill, but tailor and target. So that's a huge risk. And also, if you give Google your data and you're then watching something on YouTube and you're wearing a watch made by Google or having Android Wear, then the possibility that Google is like, oh yeah, let's actually track the heart rate. And does the heart rate actually increase if he watches a video where somebody is like doing, or if somebody watches a horror film? What happens is that you can basically predict the states of people. You can basically influence people better than ever in history before. And then something like, well, bad things happened in history, are just an inch away, you could say. And that's something that's very, very negative about all of these things. Nevertheless, yeah, well, it's a compromise. You have to find a compromise for yourself, and yeah, it's a bad deal, I guess, because you can either track all these things and give all these companies your data. Obviously, it's not like black and white, as I said before. It's much more, which steps do you additionally do? And you can do steps to protect your data For example, of course, you could use your normal name on all of these fitness apps, or you just use another name and another email address. Therefore, it's just a little hurdle more. And if somebody wants to hack you, or if Google wants to bring all these data sets together, then it's just a little bit more difficult. And therefore, you are just maybe not one of these people, but one of these people who just might benefit from all of these data sets combination in 5 years from now, because then the technology is like, oh yeah, we can also do these people because we also know the IP addresses of these people, and whenever they use their phone and whenever they use their notebook and which notebook they are using, and that they have a Samsung Galaxy S10 and that they have a Galaxy Watch 4, and also we know when this person stands up and how well this person slept, and yeah, well, things accumulate. Nevertheless, I hope I could give you an insight into how to actually build a health data system with the current state of apps and fitness tracking devices that makes sense, that also includes as many data points as possible, that is not very effort intensive. Of course, creating this is kind of one effort, but I wouldn't say I created it already for you, but you could just use these apps and then you would have a very good iteration somebody else already thought about. There might be different, better iterations out there, so better sets of all of these different connections. Of course there could, but if you just take the shortcut of all the apps I already gave to you and all of the synchronizations between apps, then you already have something established that works, and you can still improve if you want to do things differently.